probably had. I'm going to switch over to the second class for today, and that's English. Much like Brent, people would always ask if it was hard having my dad as a coach. Surprisingly, it wasn't that bad. The only thing that I ever really seemed to have a problem with was when I was a freshman, I'd have all these guys in the varsity coming up to me telling me how funny they thought my dad was. That absolutely killed me. How could his stale jokes, which I'd heard over and over for years, along with his countless lame nicknames, how could any of that elicit laughter? I couldn't understand it. For a guy that was supposed to have this great command of the English language, he seemed to resort to a lot of juvenile name-calling. Apparently, unbeknownst to me, he always seemed to save his most colorful language for his game commentary. Now, I distinctly remember one week he had brought home the game film from our prior week's game. And now, for a lot of you guys, you probably remember watching game film. And you got 65 smelly, sweaty guys sitting in a dark, cramped room. Coach Basham would sit there with remote control. He'd rewind the same damn play 50 times in a row. And it wasn't even the whole play. It was just like the center quarterback exchange. It was just brutal. Anyways, any opportunity I'd have to watch the game unedited, that was a huge bonus. So one night I'm in our living room. I decided to pop the tape in, and I started watching the game. Right away, first thing I realized is there's sound. New concept. It was great. You could hear the announcer, you could hear the crowd cheer. It's phenomenal. It's a whole new experience. When you watch the games, when the game film with Coach Basham at the helm, there's no audio. It's just totally silent. It was like 1920s silent film. And I never understood why. But I kept watching the tape, and within a couple seconds, I soon discovered why. Now, for those of you that don't know football, most of the cameramen usually sit in the press box. And while it's only natural that the camera's microphone would pick up audio from nearby coaches, somehow the only voice that ever came through on the audio was Terry's. Now, to have a running commentary from him it was a whole new experience. I just wasn't quite sure what to do. Now, you also got to understand that for my brothers and I, at home with my dad, he's a relatively quiet guy. He never used profanity. His grammar was always letter perfect. But apparently, whenever Terry left the house for football, he turned into a little sewer mouth. What is that horse's ass doing? That guy wouldn't know a B-gap if he had one in his shorts. Those big uglies need to get their asses down and block somebody. Decorum now probably prevents me from repeating most of the juicy expletives that my father would fly on that tape. But I will share the encouraging words he had when I got to the point in the game where I was returning a punt. I gotta say, nothing melts a son's heart more than to hear his father, and I actually watched the game film a week ago to make sure I had the quote right. Run north and south, you gutless turd. It's pretty elegant prose from an English teacher. Actually, I think currently my dad is actually teaching more of a creative writing class. It's where he has students do various creative writing assignments. So I thought it was only appropriate that I ended our second class today with a short haiku. Except for this one, I'm going to limit myself only being able to use my father's own catchphrases. Those aren't familiar, haiku, the time-honored Japanese poem. 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. Come here, turkey lips. You are dumber than I look. Little bag of pus. No time limit, Terry. This brings us to our final class of the day, and that would be psychology. Now, I personally didn't take it because it just seemed really hard. But I hear that one of the most basic things you'll learn in Psych 101 is the age-old cliche that when a young boy likes a girl, that affection usually manifests itself when that boy pulls the girl's hair or when he uses various forms of mockery. If making fun of someone really is a form of affection, then my family and I have loved the shit out of my dad. The source for most of our family's laughter comes at my father's expense. Not a single family meal goes by without someone taking a few pot shots at Terry. Most common punchlines usually have something to do with my dad's unmatched pessimism when it comes to Marquette football. Coach Hop stole my thunder a little bit tonight, but I'm going to proceed anyways. I think it was Coach Hop who said it best when describing my dad. When Terry heard about Murphy's Law, he thought Murphy was an optimist. That really couldn't be more accurate. If Terry's not worrying about something, chances are he isn't breathing. Hey Terry, how's the team look this year? Oh, we'll be lucky if we win 3 games. Hey Terry, how about that 31 to nothing shutout you just won? Well, the game was a lot closer than the score indicated. Now, I never quite understood if all this was just an act, or rather somehow he had found a sort of psychological loophole whereby if you expect the worst, you can achieve the most. Whatever it was, for some reason, he just never seemed overly confident about anything, even when he had great reason to. It was what I like to call psychotic humility. I started to touch on it a bit earlier when I mentioned differences between linemen and wide receivers. Wide receivers are typically loud, obnoxious, and are never short on confidence. I may or may not be a prime example of this. Linemen, on the other hand, generally toil in anonymity, quietly plugging along, oftentimes providing the foundation of winning teams, yet receiving very little recognition. While I wasn't alive to witness it, I'm positive my dad took on that persona when he was a lineman, as he's obviously still living by those standards today. Quiet, hardworking, and never in search of the spotlight. When trying to analyze what made my dad so successful, I think it boils down to the simple fact that he realized all kids were different. What motivates one player might discourage another. He knew what each player needed mentally to achieve the most. There were plenty of teams where the talent lineman was thin, but somehow Terry always found a way to cobble together a rather impressive group. He knew what worked for the players, psychologically, thus enabling them to have success physically. At the end of the day, my dad always managed to get the best out of every single player. And if tonight were any indicator, I'd say Marquette High was able to get the best out of my dad. You would think that when I was a player at Marquette, I would have appreciated all these great qualities my father had. Sadly, more often than not, I had more resentment than envy. When I was a freshman, I think we ended up cutting about 30 guys from the team. After luckily managing to survive the cut list, nothing angered me more than when guys would come up and tell me that one of the reasons I made the team was because of my dad. As a teenager, that really got to me psychologically, and it stuck with me for the rest of my time at Marquette. Was that really one of the reasons I made it? I guess it wasn't until I started working on the speech that I actually stopped to analyze the question. So I tried to picture my life as if he wasn't there. If he hadn't attended all of my Little League games, if he hadn't picked me up from tennis lessons on Saturday mornings, and then drive me over to my soccer games across town. I tried to imagine if he hadn't introduced my brothers and I to football. If he didn't get in the car morning after one of his own games to drive 2 hours north of Green Bay to watch me play in college. And I also tried to imagine if he wasn't there for 31 years, putting in 70-hour work weeks, trying to ensure that my brothers and I were able to attend such a great high school. So I guess at the end of the day, if someone were to come up to me today and ask if one of the reasons I made it, the team, were because of my dad, I think it's pretty safe to say that he was the only reason I made it. Congrats on the 31 years. You're pretty much a gutless turd.
Tim, as usual, after you speak, there's not a whole lot to say. Now you all can understand why I didn't call until Thursday. It actually took me that long for Terry to give me his cell phone. Terrific job, Tim. I think you painted a vivid yet accurate picture of your father while throwing in some humor. Terrific job. I'm actually, we have a couple of presentations to make, and I'm going to ask Brent and Tim to stop back up. We have 2 certificates of recognition from the Milwaukee County Board that we would like